Listen, I hope you and your family and your loved ones are doing well during this time of COVID-19. I'm busy during this time making a lot of educational videos to help you, and I hope that we can meet again in person sometime soon. In today's lesson, you're going to create your own dramatic scene sketch. First, what you're going to do is choose a scene from the Odyssey. Then, together with me, you and I are going to analyze the literary elements and techniques in your scene which make it interesting and memorable. After that, you and I are going to do a little pre-writing exercise to help you plot and plan your own scene sketch. And then finally, you are going to sketch out, you're going to create your own little dramatic scene based on the scene you've chosen from the Odyssey. Now, here's why what you're going to be learning today matters to your life. First of all, you're going to practice analyzing the elements and techniques that authors use to make their stories memorable and enjoyable. And as you analyze those elements and techniques, you're going to start understanding how authors do what they do, how they entertain you and me. Second, you're going to engage in a pre-writing experience as you sketch your draft scene. Now, why does this matter to you? Well, because the pre-writing experience is going to show you that actually writing is easier than you think. It's not a mystery. Most of writing involves planning your work and working your plan. Finally, today you're going to create your own little sketch of your dramatic scene. So as you create it, you're going to better appreciate the work that authors and screenwriters and playwrights do. So first I'm going to show you how you can analyze any work of literature or any movie, and how you can see what the elements and techniques in it are that make it memorable and enjoyable and popular. Then I'll show you a pre-writing technique I guarantee will set you up for writing success. And then I'll walk you through the process of creating your own dramatic scene based on the scene of your choice from the Odyssey. And I think that you'll find that creative process enjoyable and challenging and rewarding. So I want you to learn 7 amazing techniques and elements that all your favorite storytellers and your favorite movie producers use to grab you by your shirt collar and get your attention and hold it from the beginning all the way to the end, okay? And I want you to forget for a moment actually about the Odyssey and about Homer. We're going to talk about that later. I want to use right now to teach you these 7 techniques and elements. I want to use movies and stories that you are already familiar with, that you probably already know and like, that you probably watched 10 or 12 times, okay? So that you can see how all stories and all movies have these elements and techniques in common. And then after that, we will turn back to the Odyssey. You know, in a good story or movie, the conflict slowly rises, okay? The conflict starts out first, very low level, down here, and then it goes up a bit, and then it gets a little bit hotter, and then finally it gets up to here. The conflict gets white hot. This is its peak. So I'm telling you, it's slowly rising conflict, not fast rising. The temperature of the conflict rises ever so slowly. If it were fast rising conflict, then 2 things would happen. Number 1, you'd be shocked because there'd be a sudden horrible conflict that would kind of shock you out of your senses. And then two, the rest of the story would be boring for you if you just jumped right into the story and there's a huge white-hot conflict. So the conflict has to be slowly rising. So as I said, before you and I start talking about the Odyssey and Ulysses, let's first talk about 3 stories or movies that you and I know well. And I want to walk you through The Grinch, I think you know that one, and then Snow White, and then finally the movie Rocky. You know, it's the one with Sylvester Stallone playing the boxer Rocky Balboa. Okay? Let's start with The Grinch and how the conflict slowly rises in The Grinch. Ready? At the beginning of The Grinch, you see the Grinch up on his lonely cave on top of his mountain. He mutters to himself. He's in a bad mood all the time, all year round. But the conflict is low. It's not non-existent conflict, it's just low. Okay? Then the conflict rises just a little bit when the Grinch finally decides that he is going to go down to the Who's town and steal their presents. And he's making a plan. He's taking action. Conflict is getting warmer, right? Then the conflict really starts to rise as he actually goes down the mountain in his sleigh. Okay, it's getting hotter. And then the conflict gets very hot as the Grinch actually has the audacity to go into the Who's houses and steal all their toys and presents and food. Very hot conflict. And finally, the conflict gets to its blazing white-hot point as the Grinch goes up Mount Crumpet to the side of the mountain, and he's going to dump the presents off the cliff and totally ruin and destroy the Who's holiday celebration. At that point, right there, the conflict is at its hottest. Okay? So you see, in the Grinch, the conflict starts out low. It's just the Grinch being mad and grouchy about life. And then it grows as he hatches a plan, and then he goes into the Who's houses and steals their stuff, and then finally, boom, it's at its white-hot point as he's about to dump the presents off the side of Mount Crumpet. So now take a look at the conflict in Snow White. At the beginning of the story, there's a pretty low conflict. It's not conflict-free, but it's low conflict. Snow White's conflict is that her mother has died and her father has gotten married to this awful human being, and for some crazy reason, he decides to stay with her. Okay, she's, staring in her magic mirror all day. And then the conflict begins to rise as Snow White's stepmother hears from the mirror that she's no longer the fairest in the land, that Snow White's the fairest. Then the conflict rises even more, gradually, you see, when Snow White is banished from the palace. And then the conflict gets even hotter as she finds the dwarves' hut because she's not sure if it's going to work out living with them. But then you notice that the conflict begins to subside a little bit. It goes down just a little bit as Snow White and the dwarves start to get along with each other and they are friends and things are working out. But now notice this. The conflict rises again. It gets hot again as the wicked stepmother comes to the dwarves' hut in the middle of the forest and tries to kill Snow White. And then finally, boom, the conflict is white hot the moment Snow White bites from the poisoned apple and she falls down lifeless. Your conflict can't get any hotter than that. Look at the conflict in the movie Rocky by Sylvester Stallone. You've probably seen that. The conflict starts out very, very low level. Okay, Rocky has some personal problems, personal issues, but they're minor. They're way down here. He feels like a kind of loser because he's just a small-time boxer. He feels lonely because he doesn't have a girlfriend or a wife. He feels kind of depressed because he's living in a little tiny apartment all by himself and he doesn't really keep it clean and nice. Okay, so his conflict is low. But then it starts to grow. There's a scene when Rocky's trainer at the gym where he regularly trains takes away his locker from him. He throws all of Rocky's things out of the locker and he changes the lock. And then when Rocky goes to confront him, the trainer says, "It's because you're a loser, you're washed up, you're no good, you're a nobody." Okay, and then the conflict is really rising because Rocky feels embarrassed and confronted in front of all the other men. Then the conflict gets even more white hot when Apollo Creed, who's the international heavyweight boxing champion, challenges Rocky to the biggest boxing match of the year. It's going to be on New Year's Day, 1976, in honor of America's bicentennial celebrations. Okay, so conflict is getting really hot. The conflict gets even hotter when Rocky is training. You know, he's running in the streets of Philadelphia at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there's a scene when he tries to run up a flight of stone steps, but he can't quite make it at first, and he's gasping and panting, and you get a sense that maybe he won't be able to get into fighting fit shape in time for the biggest boxing match of the year. Furthermore, the conflict continues to rise. It's getting white hot because Rocky's best friend, whose name is Paulie, he's the guy who works in the meat packing plant. Paulie's starting to get envious and a little bit jealous of Rocky because Rocky's suddenly going to become a superstar and be on TV, and Rocky's also starting to date Paulie's sister, Adrian. Okay, so conflict getting super hot. And then finally, the day of the boxing match arrives. This is where the conflict is white hot. Okay, and Apollo Creed hits Rocky, and Rocky falls down. White hot conflict because it looks like Rocky's going to lose. But then the conflict gets even hotter. It gets at its most sizzling point when Rocky lands a punch on Apollo Creed, and Apollo Creed, for the very first time in his boxing career, falls down to the floor. And then everyone in the stands realizes, oh wow, this is going to be a real fight. This is going to be like a match to the very end. So that's how in Rocky the conflict goes from way down here, very low level, to way up here. And in your writing, you'll have to practice bringing your conflicts to a resolution. You have to tie your conflicts up somehow and bring them to a conclusion or a resolution. Now, bringing your conflict to a nice resolution in your story is actually easier said than done. It's actually hard to provide a good, satisfying resolution to your conflict. Now, there are two things you should avoid in life when you're telling stories and you're trying to bring a resolution to the conflict. The first of them is called the Mack truck resolution. Let me tell you what that is. It's when suddenly, out of nowhere, a third party or another force comes and settles your conflict in your story. Here's an example. Let's say you're writing a story about two 50-year-old men and their business partners. And for the whole story, they've been arguing about who's going to be the boss, because it's still 50-50, but they want it to be like 100-0, okay? They've been arguing, and finally they're in the car one day, and they're driving, and they're screaming at each other, and the conflict's getting really, really white hot, and finally the guy who's driving the car screams out to the other guy, "Listen up, buddy, I'm tired of fighting with you. I'm going to pull this car over right now, and we're going to settle this with our fists," okay? And then just before he's able to pull the car over, guess what happens? An 18-wheeler Mack truck comes and hits the car top speed, right? End of conflict, right? Wrong. No. Please don't do that, okay? That's kind of the easy way out when you're trying to provide a good resolution to the conflicts in your story. Here's another thing often people do when they're writing. This is how they try to make a resolution, but it doesn't really work. Here it is. It's called the waking up from a dream resolution to a conflict. Now, say for example that you write a story. Once upon a time, a young man was walking alone in the forest, and he came to the hut of what looked like an enchantress, and he knocked on the door, and she let him in, and she was about to serve him coffee and cake and, you know, whatever, and he was about to eat it when suddenly she turned into a three-headed monster and was about to plunge a magical silver dagger into his heart, and then he woke up and found he was actually in Elmira, New York, in his parents' house in his bedroom, okay? That's the waking up from a nightmare kind of resolution to a conflict. Please don't use that as your resolution to your conflicts. You need to be a little more creative, and you'll have to spend some more time thinking about how to tie up those conflicts and make them come to a satisfying conclusion. You know, with the Grinch, the conflict starts resolving when the Grinch hears the sound of the Who's singing their carols down in their town. Notice that there's no Mack truck coming in and saving the day and, you know, kind of getting in the Grinch's way as he's trying to ascend Mount Crumpet. Okay. Notice also that there's no angel or fairy or some magical creature that suddenly stops the Grinch in his tracks and gives him a talking to and tells him that he's better change his ways or else. Okay? The Grinch and the conflict, that white-hot conflict, are resolved in a very, very simple and natural way. It's when he hears beautiful music. So notice with Snow White that her conflict, her white-hot conflict, doesn't suddenly resolve itself after she eats the poisoned apple. The dwarves don't resuscitate her 2 minutes after she falls down to the ground. They prepare her for a burial, and for several days they're mourning for her. And the conflict does not resolve until the prince comes on his white horse and bends down and kisses her. Okay, so the conflict sinks in. The fact that Snow White is no longer alive has to sink in for the dwarves, and then only after a few days does the resolution come. And note also that in Snow White, it's not this kind of story where Snow White is poisoned by the apple and then suddenly the conflict resolves by her waking up in her parents' palace like a spoiled little princess and saying, oh, that was a horrible nightmare, you know, the kind of nightmare that only a princess can have. Now look at how the conflict resolves itself in Rocky. Notice that the conflict resolution in Rocky is not a total, absolute conflict resolution. If you remember the movie, at the end of the movie, he doesn't actually knock Apollo Creed out. All Rocky does is he survives the fight, okay? But he doesn't emerge as the uncrowned or as the new champion of the world. Notice also he doesn't marry his girlfriend Adrian in the end. I mean, he's still with her. She's very faithful and loyal to him, but that conflict is not totally resolved, you know, because he was lonely and he didn't have a girlfriend. And this kind of conflict resolution that you see in a movie like Rocky is actually very, very powerful because it suggests that the conflict is going to be resolved. It suggests that in the future, Rocky's going to be a great world heavyweight champion. It suggests that in the end, Rocky and Adrian are finally going to get married. But it's just a suggestion. It's not making it absolutely clear. And that can be very powerful as conflict resolution. Now, there's another thing that all your favorite stories and movies have in common, and it's that the hero of the story or the movie, throughout the course of the story, does a complete, total, absolute 180-degree change. Have you noticed that? The character starts out the story one way, and then in the middle of the story, things happen, and the character begins to change, and by the end of the story, the character has done a complete and total character transformation. Listen, your character has to change, and the change has to be complete and total and absolute. It has to be a 180-degree change, okay? If your character, for example, was born rich at the beginning of your story, he needs to end the story penniless. If he was born penniless at the beginning of your story, he needs to end the story a multimillionaire. You see what I'm saying? Your readers crave to see a great story. And one of the elements of a great story is that 180-degree character change, that character transformation. You cannot get away with telling a story in which your characters do not change, in which they're static, okay? Let me show you an example of a story that you can't get away with telling, okay? And I actually typed it out on my computer beforehand. I'm just going to read it aloud to you because I really want to drive this point home, and I didn't want to forget the story. Listen to this. This is what you cannot do, because it shows characters not changing. Once upon a time, there was a family of perfect people with the perfect home, the perfect car, and the perfect life. They even had servants who attended to their every need. The parents did not have to work because they had inherited $1 billion. The children did not have to go to school and do things like math homework because they would one day inherit their parents' fortune. Everyone, every single day, woke up happy and in a good mood. They stayed in a good mood all day long. And during the day, all they did was sit around in their parlor and sip tea and munch on crumpets. Their evenings were drenched in candlelight and champagne. Their only worry in life was what they would order their cook to fix for lunch every day. And this is how their lives played out, year after year, decade upon decade, forever and ever, etc., ad infinitum, ad nauseam. Okay? Ready? No, you cannot tell a story like that. And you won't get away with telling a story like that because nothing changes. Everything's perfect forever and ever in these people's lives. Your characters have to change, and they have to change dramatically. So here's how you could fix that story that I just told you, by making your characters change. I've written this down on the computer for you as well. Let me read it. So, for example, you could make the parents in the beginning of the story have billions of dollars, but then they suddenly lose the billions for whatever reason. And then they have to sell their big, giant home, and they have to fire all their servants. And then the children would have to start paying more attention in school. And they'd have to consider doing useful jobs in the future, like, being nurses and managers and bus drivers. And then the parents themselves would have to make that 180-degree change. They'd have to get some sense knocked into them. And let's say they go become lawyers, but not high-flying lawyers in the big city, but lawyers who represent people who have no money. They're lawyers who get $35,000 a year. Okay, and so they're representing people with no money, and then they have to live in a tiny, tiny house in a small town in the middle of nowhere instead of in the big city. But then, see, here's where the big 180-degree change comes in. But then the parents realize that the point of life is not to be served and to just sit around all day in your big mansion. The point of life is to serve your neighbors and to help those who need help most. And so then they become nice people, and they are, better and more likable, okay? You see that? That's the end of the story. That's an example of a 180-degree character change. And your characters need to have that 180-degree character transformation, because otherwise, why would you even bother to write a story in the first place if your characters are just going to remain static? Look at the 180-degree change in the Grinch. At the beginning of the story, the Grinch is lonely and miserable way up in his cave. He treats his dog badly. He's not even nice to his pet. He hates holidays, and he hates his neighbors, the Whos. But by the end of the story, the Grinch has done a 180-degree change. He is a brand new man. He's nice to his neighbors. He's celebrating holidays. And you get a sense that maybe he's even going to move down from his cold, icy cave way up on the mountain. Maybe he's going to come down and live among normal human beings, So he has undergone a complete character transformation. At the beginning of Snow White's life is pretty miserable because she lives in a palace with a stepmother who hates her and makes her life wretched. Okay? By the end of the story, however, Snow White's life has done a complete 180. She's a totally different woman because she goes off to live with Prince Charming, who we believe loves her and is devoted to her. At the beginning of Rocky, Rocky feels like the biggest loser on the face of the earth because he doesn't feel very successful and he's all alone. Okay, but by the end of the movie, his life has undergone a 180-degree transformation. He's got a great girlfriend who's loyal to him, and now he is one of the best boxers on planet Earth. It's complete character change. When you write, it's good for you to make sure that your writing appeals to the 5 physical senses. Okay? The sense of sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. You and I were born with 5 physical senses, okay? Some people may not be able to see or hear, but most of us do have our 5 senses intact. And even if you don't, you still have 4 or 3 senses intact, and that's good enough, isn't it? Your writing needs to appeal to the senses because we use our 5 senses to learn about and to explore the amazing world we live in. And if your writing doesn't appeal to the 5 senses, it's dull and lifeless, and it's unreal, because the real world is full of beauty that we see with our eyes. I hear birdsong right now up here on this mountain. There are frogs also in the pond I'm standing by croaking. I don't know if you can hear them on the microphone. I can smell the fresh mountain air. I can smell the smell of spring. Okay? My senses are at work. Your senses are always at work. So please get the 5 senses into your writing. Now, when you're writing essays for school, you're really not supposed to inject the 5 physical senses into your school essays. Your teacher in English class or in history class wants you to stick with the facts, with basic academic facts. And you're not supposed to, for example, in an English essay, describe the taste of a lemon. Or you're not supposed to describe the smell of the man you walked by yesterday in the street who smelled like a day-old grilled cheese sandwich, or whatever. And that's okay for school, to write essays that do not appeal to the 5 physical senses. But if you're going to do creative writing, you need to inject the 5 physical senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, into your works. Otherwise, your works will be lifeless and no one will want to read them. Now look at how in The Grinch, how Dr. Seuss, the author, appeals to your senses, your 5 physical senses. First of all, he appeals to your sense of sight. He makes the Grinch green, and that's very memorable for everybody. Kids all over the world, when they see that green creature, they know exactly who it is. They know it's the Grinch. Okay, so that's sense of sight. Dr. Seuss also appeals to your sense of hearing. Remember how the Grinch is irritated by the Who's Christmas carols they sing every year? Okay, and remember also when he's about to dump all their toys off the side of Mount Crumpit, what does he hear? He hears the Who's joyful singing, okay, appealing to your sense of hearing. Notice also how Dr. Seuss appeals to your sense of taste and smell, because he shows you the beautiful food that the Who's have for their feast, and he shows you them eating and drinking and making merry. Now look now at Snow White and how Snow White appeals to your 5 physical senses. First of all, it appeals to your sense of sight, because Snow White is very beautiful, isn't she? Her wicked stepmother is also beautiful. This also appeals to your sense of sight, but the wicked stepmother is beautiful to look at in a kind of wicked and evil and cruel way. Okay? Snow White also appeals to your sense of hearing. Think of the song the dwarves sing as they go off to work every day. Hi ho, it's off to work we go. It's a very memorable song. You could probably sing it right now if you wanted to. Finally, there's a very big sense appeal in Snow White. It's the appeal to your sense of taste. Because as Snow White bites from that poisoned apple, it's as if you and I can kind of taste that bitter poison in the apple ourselves. And look also how, for example, Rocky appeals to your 5 physical senses. First of all, it appeals to your sense of touch, your sense of feeling. You know, there's that scene where he's in the meat packing plant and he's punching the sides of frozen beef, and he's punching them so hard that his own hands get all frozen and bloody. And I don't know about you, but when I see something like that, it's like I can feel that in my own hands. It really appeals to my sense of feeling. There's another scene in Rocky that appeals to your sense of taste. You know, it's when his girlfriend is cooking the Thanksgiving turkey in the oven, and then for some crazy reason, her brother walks in the kitchen and he throws half the turkey out the door, and then he's got only a drumstick left in his hand, and he's walking around the house screaming at everybody and ranting and raving, you know, eating turkey with one hand, and the other hand he's got a can of beer. Okay, so, I mean, it's a crazy scene, but it appeals to your sense of taste. Finally, Rocky appeals to your sense of smell. You know, when you see the scenes in which Rocky is training in the gym, you know, you can almost smell the decades worth of sweat, you know, perspiration that, you know, has built up in the atmosphere there. And also, there's the scene where he has the little nervous breakdown, and he's in his apartment late at night, and he's kind of screaming about how horrible his life is. And he says about his apartment, he says, it stinks, and I know it stinks, okay, because, you know, he never, you know, cleans it. So again, appealing to your sense of smell, even in the movie. You can't smell the smell of his apartment, but you can imagine it very vividly. You know, you and I have more than just 5 physical senses. We also have psychic senses. And let me tell you more about that. In the books and movies you and I love and know and enjoy, the authors appeal to your and my psychic senses. For example, we have the sense of surprise, okay? And many books and movies appeal to our sense of surprise. We like surprises. You and I also have a sense of mystery. We kind of like mysteries. Our minds dwell on mysteries and we try to solve them. Well, as you know, many books and movies appeal to our sense of mystery. And books and movies can appeal to many of the other psychic senses as well. There's a sense of, for example, disgust. There's a sense of fairness or unfairness. There are so many different psychic senses, and I'll be talking to you about more of them later. But suffice it to say for now, in your writing, you need to make sure that you are appealing to your reader's psychic senses. It's not enough to just appeal to the 5 physical senses, because we also have psyches. We have minds and spirits, and we need to appeal to those as well. Consider how the Grinch appeals to your psychic senses. I don't know about you, but at the beginning of the story, I feel the psychic sense of pity for the Grinch when he's up there on his lonely, windswept mountain in his cave. I don't feel disgusted by him. I just feel sorry for him because he's so pitiable. However, when the Grinch goes down to Whoville and starts stealing everybody's toys and food and presents, that appeals to my psychic sense of horror. I think it's horrible what he is doing. And then, as he takes all the toys and presents up to Mount Crumpet to dump them, that scene appeals to my sense of unfairness, because I don't know about you, but I think it's profoundly unfair that he's decided he has a right to spoil everybody's holiday. Finally, though, at the end, when the Grinch is dining with the Whos, that appeals to my psychic sense of hopefulness, because it makes me say, you know what? There is hope for humanity. Even though sometimes we can be really nasty toward each other and not very generous, we can learn to change. We can become different people. So again, that appeals to my psychic sense of hopefulness. In Snow White, it appeals, I think, to your psychic sense of fear or dread when you see the wicked stepmother looking at herself in the mirror and talking to her magical mirror. I think if you're anything like me, it might send chills up your spine, okay? That appeals to the psychic sense of dread. However, when Snow White is living with the 7 dwarves and everything is peaceful and harmonious and things are going very well, they're living this nice cozy life in the forest. And I don't know about you, but that appeals to my psychic sense of coziness. It makes me feel safe and protected because Snow White and the 7 dwarves are also safe and protected. You know, in Rocky, there's a great appeal to your psychic sense of pride. I don't know about you, but you probably feel proud of him as he's jogging in downtown Philadelphia and he's trying to run up those stairs, and finally he makes it to the very top and he puts his arms way up in the air because he is victorious. Okay, that appeals to your sense of pride. Okay, you can identify with him. Also, as he's fighting against Apollo Creed in the ring and he stands his ground, he does not get knocked out, you probably feel a sense of accomplishment, even though it's not you in the ring fighting, but you kind of identify with Rocky and you say, yeah, he did it. Good for him. In your creative writing, there's another thing you need to do. You need to appeal to the sense of motion. What do I mean by this? Your writing has to show your characters moving, preferably as much as possible. You need to show people running and jumping and swimming. You need to show people rolling their eyes, wildly gesticulating with their hands, wiping their mouths with a napkin, waving goodbye to each other, etc. And not only that, if you have animals in your story, you need to show animals doing animal things. You need to show them flying. You need to show them like a dog chasing after a rabbit, for example. And not only animals. You need to have a flag, like the flag in front of the high school in your story. The flag needs to be flapping in the breeze. The leaves on the trees need to be rustling. The water in a pond needs to be rippling gently. Because if you think about it, all of the world is always in motion, constant motion. Even you're in motion right now, even though you're probably just sitting down. Your heart is pumping. It's moving. The blood is circulating through your body. Motion. Okay? Your lungs are pumping air. Motion. Your digestive system is digesting food. Okay? Your body is always in motion. The earth itself is spinning and twirling through the depths of black space. Okay? So you need to inject motion into your writing, because otherwise your writing will be kind of lifeless. Imagine life without motion. If there were no motion, you and I would be statues. Okay, we wouldn't be able to get anything done. the world would come to a complete stop because, again, the earth is always spinning and twirling around the sun. I cannot underscore this enough for you, and I really want you to remember this, that in your writing, you need to show people running, jumping, swimming, fighting, playing, laughing, pulling weeds out of their front yard, painting the backyard fence, stuffing their faces with pizza and cupcakes, whatever it may be, but you need to show as much motion as you possibly can, because you know what? That's what we human beings do. We are in motion. We're not statues. And as long as we're still alive, and I think that if you're watching this video, there's a good chance you're alive, and cheers to that. As long as you and I are still alive, we are always in motion, and your writing, your creative writing, needs to be in motion. Please. Now, look at how the Grinch gets moving in his story. From the very beginning, you see that he's tying Antlers to his dog Max, and then he's hitching Max up to the ramshackle sleigh. And then the Grinch and Max are whizzing down the mountain toward Whoville. And then he's climbing up onto the roofs of the houses, and then he's going down the chimney, and then he's stuffing all the toys and presents into a sack, and then he's speeding back up the mountain to dump it all out, okay? From the very beginning of the Grinch is always in motion. He's not just sitting up in his icy cave all day thinking negative, bad thoughts about the Whos and how much he doesn't like them. He's actually doing something about his anger and his frustration. And that's what you need to have your characters in your writing do too. You need them to be taking action. Now look at how Snow White is in motion. When she first starts living with the 7 dwarves, she gets down to business, and she's mopping and dusting and sweeping. She's making their beds. She's in motion. She's cooking soup. She's baking bread. She's always in motion. She's always doing something. No one needs to tell her, oh, Snow White, start doing your chores. Come on, get off the couch. She is in motion. Rocky is in motion in almost every single second of the movie. He's jogging through the streets of Philadelphia. He's punching a punching bag. He's arguing, sometimes loudly, with other people. He's trying to beat Apollo Creed to a bloody pulp. Rocky is constantly moving. He seems never to slow down. And again, in your writing, your characters need to be moving too. Another thing important for your writing is you need to learn the technique of layering your time, using layered time. Let me tell you what that means. Right now I'm in the present, and so are you. But in our minds, we're not always in the present. Okay? Our bodies are in the present, but in our minds, sometimes we're in the past, and sometimes we're in the future. Okay? Sometimes we're in the past and we're reminiscing about bygone days. Or we're remembering when someone treated us badly or insulted us, okay? Sometimes we get stuck in the past, right? Okay? That's the past. Now, about the future. Often you and I daydream about what the future is going to be like. We have fantasies about all kinds of glorious and wonderful things we're going to accomplish in the future. Even though our bodies are still in the present, our minds, our psyches, fast forward to the future. Okay, this is something we all do, okay? There's no shame in it. We get sometimes stuck in the past, and sometimes we daydream about the future. Now, in your writing, ready? In your writing, it's good for you to include flashbacks to the past, to show us the backstory, to show us what happened long ago, before the story started. And it's also good to suggest or hint at what's going to happen in the future of your story after the characters have resolved their conflicts. Okay? This is what you can call layered time. So your story is taking place, in whatever time you set it in, but in your story, you are consistently referring back in time to before the story started, and you're sometimes referring to a future point in time beyond the limits of the story. In your writing, you need to layer time. You need layered time because if you don't use layered time, your writing will be flat and lifeless. Now think about it. In your life and in my life, I don't know about you, but I often spend a lot of time daydreaming. I always have, and I think that most of us do that. When we daydream, we're thinking about wonderful things in the future, okay? Daydreaming is like the spice of life, okay? We also sometimes get stuck in the past. We nurse old wounds, don't we? We think about bad things that have happened to us, but we also think about wonderful things from the past. So again, in your writing, I beseech you to please make sure you're layering time, referring to the past as well as to the future of your characters. Because you know what? You have a past, I have a past. Your characters need a past too. And you have a future, and I have a future. Well, guess what? Your characters need a future too, and it's your job to give them a past, and it's your job also to give them a future. So please make sure you layer time. In The Grinch, Dr. Seuss uses layered time. For example, in the beginning of the story, there's an emphasis on the past because the Grinch is meditating about all of the previous Christmases when the Who's irritated him with their singing and their dancing and their feasting. So the Grinch is stuck in the past and he really can't get out of it. Okay? So that's the layering of time in the past. And at the very end of the story, there's layering of time directed toward the future because you get the sense that in the future, maybe things will be different with the Grinch. Maybe he's learned his lesson and he's changed for the better. Now look at layered time in Snow White. First, at the beginning of the story, you get a sense of Snow White's backstory because you are told that Snow White's mother died and that her father married this awful, vain, wicked stepmother. Okay, so you know something of Snow White's past. And again, layered time. At the end of Snow White, you see her ride off into the sunset with her Prince Charming. And so you and I get a sense of Snow White's future time. We get a sense that her life is going to be lived happily ever after. Now in Rocky, you also see layered time. First, you get a sense of Rocky's past. You get a sense of his backstory, that he's had a very difficult life. And you really get a sense of his backstory when his trainer screams at him and tells him he's a loser and he's all washed up. You also see layered time in connection with Rocky's future because by the end of the movie, you and I get the sense that Rocky's future is going to be very different. Now let's review the elements and techniques that you can use in your writing to make your stories sizzle. So you need slowly rising conflict. Your conflict needs to start out low and then grow gradually until it's blazing white hot. And you need some form of conflict resolution. And it doesn't have to be a perfect resolution. You can leave the resolution ambiguous or even open-ended. Another element you need to use is complete character transformation. It's when your character does that 180-degree change. He or she becomes a completely different person. If your character starts out poor, he ends up rich. If she starts out rich, she ends up poor. Remember, good writing appeals to the 5 physical senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. So you need psychic appeals. Your writing needs to appeal to the psyche, to the sense of surprise, the sense of disgust, the sense of horror, the sense of hopefulness, the sense of fairness, the sense of joy. You need motion appeals. You have to show characters and animals and nature in motion. You also need layered time. You need to show us the character's backstory, what happened in their past, and you need to hint at what is going to be happening in their future. So now let's do some writing together. At the end of this video, you're going to have the chance to choose one of 4 videos. And all you have to do is watch one of those 4 videos, and then you're going to do a quick and painless writing exercise at the end of it. Now, of course, you don't have to watch just one of the videos. If you want to, you can watch all 4. And hey, that's not a bad idea, because if you do watch all 4, you will really and truly have mastered the elements and techniques of writing great stories. But again, you only really need to watch and do just one video. So at the end of the video that you're going to watch, you'll have the pre-writing exercise. You're going to do some pre-writing on a graphic organizer. I'll walk you through it. And then finally, you get to create your own sketch or your own draft of your dramatic scene. So the first video is the Cyclops. And if you're the kind of person who likes politics, if you like parties, if you like plotting and scheming, if you maybe even like playing tricks on other people, this video might be for you. It's the Cyclops. If you like pondering the meaning of life and why sometimes good people suffer and bad things happen to good people, and why life is sometimes unfair, then you may enjoy watching the second video. It's Aeolus. Again, Aeolus, if you're a philosophically minded sort of person. If you're into music, if you're a kind of musical person, you might want to watch the video called The Sirens. That's especially for musically oriented people. And if you're into science, and if you're a kind of nature buff, you might really enjoy the video on Scylla and Charybdis, because it has scientific and naturalistic elements in it. Again, Scylla and Charybdis for you science buffs. So I want to thank you for watching this video and for learning to identify and evaluate and analyze these 7 elements and techniques of powerful storytelling. In a few moments' time, I'm going to put up a slide to remind you again what your 4 choices for your next videos are, okay? And I would ask you to, again, look at those choices, and then very quickly, before you do anything else, before you get distracted, before you forget, click on one of those 4 videos, watch it, and then do the activity at the end of it. So please do that right now before something else comes up. I'll see you in the next video. Please choose your next video now. If you like politics, parties, and plotting, watch The Cyclops. If you like thinking about the meaning of life and the point of suffering, watch Aeolus. If you're into music, watch The Sirens. If you're a science buff, watch Scylla and Charybdis. Please choose your next video now. Go ahead and choose your next video now while it's still fresh in your mind. Make this the very next thing you do. If you don't watch the next video right away, you might forget to, and then you'll never be able to practice the secrets of writing powerful stories. Watch the next video now, and you'll belong to an exclusive club of high school students in America who really, deeply understand the elements and techniques of making sizzling, unforgettable stories. You'll be learning things that most educated adults in America today don't even know about telling powerful, grab-you-by-the-throat stories. Go ahead and watch your next video right now.